bueno, mi gente. Cali's Boxing here, and it's good to be here. This is going to be the final show of the year. And as you can see, it's in a different office. I'm at an offsite office. It's just going to be what it's going to be today. Hopefully the internet behaves, and hopefully y'all hear this loud and clear. Saludos to my guy, Jesus. Appreciate you always rolling through, man. Jesus, you're one of the dudes, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate the regulars that always swing through. And in the last show of the year, I just want to point out that we've had a lot of growth here this past year. I decided this year that, I'm not going to focus so much on just getting out a bunch of videos. I'm just going to get on here and try to do 2 podcasts per week and just try to give people good content and see where it goes, and we've grown. And I can tell we've grown by the numbers in the back office and the retention rate. The retention rate is big. People are staying here. And the fact that I continue to get the same regulars back, even without YouTube cooperating. I have people just hit me up all the time. Look, I'm not getting alerts. And there's really nothing we can do about that. I can try to warn people in a community page. Unfortunately, with my schedule, I don't know when I'm going live. I can't have a set time where I go live each week, unfortunately. So it is what it is. But I can tell we're getting that growth, and I appreciate y'all, man. Like, I appreciate, without the chat, we have no community here. And this is a community. This isn't a guy just hopping on here and speaking down to people in the chat, because I'm in no position to do that. This is us just communicating. And we're not an echo chamber. We're just not. So we're going to bounce ideas off of each other. We'll come to agreement on some stuff we won't. And it's a beautiful community, versatile, diverse community, a boxing fan. But we all want the same thing, right? We want what's best for the sport, yada, 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 and push back on bad narratives. So saludos to Jesus. Salute to Anthony. Spence tougher task compared to Fulton and Tapales, even though Tapales gave Inoue excellent fight. I understand. Salute to Hybrid 25 US Inoue Fighter of the Year. Shout out my guy Chauncey. That's another regular, another dude I communicate with off of here as well. So shout out OJ22. Happy New Year to you and your family. People come here for truth. I hope so, Troy Mack, and I appreciate you. Once again, you're another dude, and I see your comments in the archive as well, so I appreciate you watching in the archives. Batman Boxing, my guy, Inoue pound for pound #1 and Fighter of the Year opinion, and I agree with that opinion. I'm a new subscriber, longtime boxing fan, love your channel. I appreciate the unbiased content, and I appreciate you for coming through, and hopefully I do give people an unbiased viewpoint. Look, I almost didn't come through today. Got poked in the eye playing basketball yesterday, and I might have to put some glass. I didn't want to look like one of those sunglasses indoor dudes, but I might have to slip these on in a minute because just the lights just bother me right now. So it is what it is. I'm not looking to reward inactivity in a marinated fight that took far too long to make. I got you. And we're going to have all kind of opinions on Inoue versus Bud. Let's start off there. Because what I don't want to see, and I see this happening in the box community, I'll put out an opinion saying I think Inoue is Fighter of the Year, and I don't believe that you can have a fighter, or should have a fighter, who fights once in a year as Fighter of the Year. Just my opinion. And then I'll see people react to these opinions, and then I'll see them go off on their own and put off content. And then they'll start to, instead of just building Bud up, just a specific example here, and I've seen them do this with Canelo as well, they will try to knock Inoue down. I've seen a lot of this. And what I want to see is us understand and push the opinion that Inoue and Bud are both special. They're both special. And I'm not going to tear Bud down just to build my argument for Inoue number pound for pound up. I'm just not. I understand the opinion. If you're of the opinion that Bud is #1 pound for pound, you've got great arguments for that. And I'm not going to tear down your opinion, and I'm definitely not going to try to knock Bud down to build an argument for Inoue number one pound for pound up. I'm not. Both these guys are special, fellas. I've just made the point that I think where the separation is between In and Bud is activity. I'm an activity guy. So the fact that the past 3 calendar years, he's doubled Bud's output. He's made his claim double the amount of times as Bud for pound, because make no mistake about it, when Bud fights, people are saying that's the pound for pound king. When Inoue fights, people are saying that's the pound for pound king. It's the Mayweather-Pacquiao thing all over again. It's, man, Mayweather looked great. I think he's pound for pound king. Man, Pacquiao looked great. I think he's pound for pound king. And then we're doing this now with Inoue and Bud. And the unfortunate part is much different weight classes, too much separation. So they'll never be able to fight each other. So we're dealing with a subjective list, and we're dealing with subjective awards, right? Because we're not giving away awards. We're not giving away trophies. So we're dealing with something that's subjective as far as fighter of the year too. So there's no need to go there, in which I see it, man. I see people say my opinion of Inoue being fighter of the year and pound for pound king, and then they'll start to try to knock Inoue down. And they'll do these weird like Zapruder films of Inoue, 10-second videos of him getting punched by Tapalis and say, man, that's going to catch up to Inoue one day. Man, that's not good. It's not good that he got hit right there. It's not good. It's not good. And we see what you're doing. We see it. And it's low-hanging fruit stuff. And it's weird because fighters get hit. Fighters get hit. And when you say Inoue got hit with flush with this Tapalis shot with the right hand, it's going to catch up to him one day. When? When's it going to catch up? The dude is already 108 champ, 112 champ, 118 champ, 122 champ, 26-0, 27-0, whatever it is at this point, 22, 23 title fights with 21 knockouts, whatever it is at this point. When's it going to catch up? When is he going to be exposed? Do you see how he left his left hand down right there and got caught with that right hand of Tapalis? And if another dude gets hold of him, who? And when? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? If another person, dude, we can do this with anybody. And I saw them doing this to Bud before the Arrow fight. And I'm watching this stuff. I'm like, they know, right? Like, they know that Bud's not going to leave himself open like he did against Avanesian right there. They have to know that, right? They have to know Bud has a great chin, even if Spence catches him with that shot, right? They have to know that. They know that Bud fights to his level of opposition. They have to know that Inoue, if he fights, goes up to 126, he's not going to leave his hand down like that, like he did against Tapalis in the 6th, 7th round, whatever you're doing this video for. When he's already felt Tapalis' power and he didn't feel in danger, so he's leaving his hand down there to lure him into more trades. Wake up. Use common sense. And what I'm saying is we shouldn't be tearing these fighters down. I've seen these guys in the past that are now doing this. There's no need to do it. I've seen them big up Inoue in the past, big up Bud in the past. And now, since we're doing this Inoue and Bud, I don't know who's pound for pound number one. They got to tear down one at the expense of the other just to build the other up, man. It's sad. It's sad. You don't have to do it. These are both special fighters. Inoue and Bud, both special fighters. Enjoy the greatness. And to start off with pound for pound, just to give my opinion on this, is we look for separation on pound for pound lists, right? And the pound for pound list isn't supposed to be a list. D-Style Boxing has talked about this in the past. It's not supposed to be a list. It's supposed to be a guy. It's supposed to be a dude that we point to and say, other than the heavyweight, the baddest man on the planet, that's our guy. That's our guy that if we're telling people who is the best fighter on the planet, who's the best fighter on the planet? And in order to do that, we have to do this pound for pound thing, right? Is obviously the heavyweight beats everybody. He's naturally bigger. Obviously, if Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk fought the guys in the lower weight classes, they would beat them, right? Because they're bigger. But there are weight classes for a reason. So if we somehow morph these guys into all the same size, who would our guy be? That's what pound for pound is. And in order to do that, in order to find a guy, we make a list, right? And then we have to deduct with this list on who is the guy. We have to find separation. And to me, the 4 guys, I've talked about this, that have separated themselves from the pack would be Inoue, Bud, Canelo, Usyk. Separated themselves from the pack, right? Great punch placement, great resumes, right? Let's start there. Great resumes. They've proved it in the ring against top competition. This isn't the eye test anymore. Other guys, you have to go off the eye test. They simply haven't done enough over a specific time period, a long time period. So we're going to go off of these top 4 guys have done this throughout 20 plus title fights at this point. Multiple different weight classes. All have become undisputed. All have been in there with guys and have looked great as they've gone up in competition, as they've gone up in weight classes. They've still looked the same or even better. And they've done it for a long period of time. So that's our guys, right? And there was a longer list of guys, but Lomachenko no longer with that top 4. There's been separation. He's sort of fallen off of that list. Chocolatito, Gallo Estrada, due to inactivity. Those guys have fallen, and the top 4 have separated themselves from those guys. And then you look for further separation because 4 is too many. We want a guy, right? We want a guy. So then we say Bud and Inoue have separated themselves from Usyk and Canelo, and that's no disrespect to Usyk and Canelo because they'll have their opportunity to stick around and do more special things to try to get themselves back to the top. Canelo was just at the top. And I'm not saying overall pound for pound all time they've separated themselves from that. I'm saying currently, Bud and Inoue have separated themselves. And how have they done that? I think it's because they continue to knock guys out and put on pound for pound performances against top competition in title fights. They continue to get accolades. Both became undisputed this year. When Canelo was undisputed, Canelo was pound for pound in 2021, he became undisputed. It's great achievement. And despite what people do with their revisionist history, it was a great achievement to do that within 11 months. Consolidate the whole division and beat guys that a year before they were saying Canelo wouldn't beat, and to knock them out in the process. Just run through the division. It was a beautiful feat. But now Inoue and Bud have separated themselves because they continue to do that. Whereas Usyk and Canelo still doing great things, but the performances aren't to where Inoue and Bud's are at this specific time, right? But here's where Inoue and Bud, you look for further separation because you can have a 1A, 1B despite what people say. And I have had a 1A, 1B, but now I have a 1. And why is that? Since 2020, since the shutdowns, Inoue has fought 7 times. Bud has fought 4. All title fights. Pound for pound level performances every time. But Inoue has done it double the amount of times as Bud. 2021, Inoue fought twice, Bud once. 2022, Inoue fought twice, Bud once. 2023, Inoue fought twice, Bud fought once. He's in our faces more. It's more difficult to show up, do another training camp, and do it again. We've seen it this year. We've seen upset after upset after upset. It's easy to say, oh, it wouldn't have mattered because Bud would have beat those guys anyway, but you got to go out and do it. And I understand, man, people can say he was waiting around for Errol. He's got to wait around for Errol again to see rematch clause. I get all that, but stuff happens. Inoue is fighting twice per year. Bud's fighting once per year. We have a full-time fighter versus a part-time fighter, and that's why we have Inoue number 1 and Bud number 2. That is the separation. And it's healthier for us to have a full-time fighter at the top. It's easier for us. It's better for us. It's healthier for the sport. If we have a guy at the top who we know that guy is going to be back in May, and we know he's going to be back in September or December. We had that with Canelo. We still have that with Canelo, the face of boxing, because despite where the pound-for-pound rankings are, Canelo's still the face of boxing. And it's great to have a face of boxing who we can point to and say, that guy's going to be back in May, and that's good. That guy's going to be back again in September after that, and that's good. That's healthy for the sport. It's not healthy for the sport. Even if a guy wins, we don't know when we're going to see him again. And to be honest, and this isn't to tear down Bud at all, because once again, I'm a fan. He's a special fighter despite all of this. But no fighter is above criticism, and that's my criticism of Bud, is it's been too inconsistent with activity the past 4 calendar years. You'd like to see him more. You'd like to see a pattern of behavior to where he's there in May, he'll be back in December. I'm reading an article people are sending me on Boxing Scene yesterday to where Inoue and his team are saying, we want to be back in May. We want to fight in the Tokyo Dome, 55,000. Tyson's fought there twice. Other than that, I don't think there's a boxing match that's ever been placed in the Tokyo Dome. We've outgrown the 15,000 seat arena. We have a long waiting list of people who want to get in the arena. We can't cater to the amount of people that we need to cater to anymore, so we need to do the Tokyo Dome, 55,000. And I see that and I say, this guy's a star now. He's a star. Despite what the American dudes are out there telling you, he's a star. He's an international star at this point. He's making a ton of money. But I'm reading the article and I see once again a consistent pattern of behavior is right after Inoue fights, they're already talking about his next fight. We talked about the YouTube guys doing this. I got to put my glasses on, fellas. I'm sorry because my eyes with this light starting to bother me. Had a eye injury yesterday, but we now have a consistent pattern of behavior with Inoue too. Is May. They're already talking about May. And then they're going to talk about December. They're already talking about this guy possibly fighting 3 times. Inoue wants to fight 3 times in 2024. He's saying, I want to fight 3 times in 2024. Neri, Akhmadaliev, and then another fight in December. That's what I want to do. And I want to fight in the Tokyo Dome, 55,000 people. I'd like to fight in Saudi Arabia. LA is a possibility. And now we're talking. We have that consistent pattern of behavior over here with Inoue. And with Bud, it gets a little more difficult, right? It gets a little more tricky with fights. And a lot of that has to do with he doesn't have that built-in fan base that Inoue has, unfortunately. So it's a little more difficult, I think, for him to make fights with other fighters. But you have fighters calling him out right now. So what you like to see with Bud is let's get some movement. We're 5 months. It's December 29th, so we're 5 months removed today. 5 months today removed from Bud Crawford annihilating Errol Spence. When's his next fight? And this is what I'm talking about. It's healthy to have a guy you can point to say, that's our guy. And they'll say, okay, so when's he fighting next? If you talk to a casual, they're going to want to know who's the best fighter in the sport. Who's the best fighter in the sport? So if you have this conversation with them and you say, Bud Crawford's the best fighter in the sport. Okay, when's he fighting again? I don't really know. Inoue is the best fighter in the sport. When's he fighting again? He's fighting in May. Probably in the Tokyo Dome, 55,000 people. And you could say that has nothing to do with pound for pound. We're just picking who's the best. And this is what I'm saying is the separation between Inoue and Bud is that it's activity. He's doing it more, and it's more difficult to do it more. It was my knock on pound for pound list when Canelo loses to Bivol, another top 5, 6 pound for pound guy, and they put him below Errol Spence, who Canelo has tripled Errol Spence's output the past 4 or 5 years. He's tripled his output as far as fights. So we have to consider this stuff when we're talking about pound for pound and who's the best fighter in the sport, because that's more difficult to do. It's easier to look good especially if you're a guy who's capable of it, because not a lot of fighters are capable of fighting once per year and looking good. We saw that with Fulton Jr. We saw that with Errol Spence against Bud Crawford. We've seen inactive guys not do well, right? But at the same time, man, when you have a fighter who's in the gym and is capable of doing this and fighting once per year and still looking good, Bud Crawford and Usyk, that's easier to do than what Inoue's and Canelo's are trying to pull off. Fighting consistently, fighting often, and just being having a consistent pattern of behavior as a fighter. But also what we have to keep in mind, and we have to preface this because we don't want to make it look like we're tearing Crawford down, because that's not what we're doing. This has been a pro Bud Crawford account for a decade now. Is a lot of this has to do with guys not wanting to fight him the past few years. We have to take that into account. So when guys push back with that, it's like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I get it. I get how you could have Bud Crawford as pound for pound king. I get it, because when I watch him fight, I'm like, yeah, that's the dude. That's the dude that I've been following for a decade and big up. And I get it. I get it. I get it. I get that if you don't value activity as much as we do, how you could have Bud Crawford as your fighter of the year. I get it. My only point with that is you have writers, publications pushing inactivity and how it's bad for the sport. But then they go over here. After they're doing that over here, they'll go over here and hand over fighter of the year to a fighter who fought once, and that's inconsistent. They'll do that over here and talk about how terrible inactivity is for the sport and how we need more activity. And then they'll go over here and they'll hand their 2010's fighter of the decade to Floyd Mayweather, who fought once per year throughout the decade on average. He fought 10 times and he fought only once the second half of the decade against a guy who was 0-0. So if activity isn't your thing, if you don't value it much, if you don't care about it, if it's not your soapbox that you're pushing, then I understand how you could have Bud Crawford, your fighter of the year for fighting once and looking great. Because to me, to hand out another fake award, another invisible award here, is Bud Crawford had the performance of the year. And we had a lot of great performances of the year, fellas. We did. We had two from Inoue, really, but the first one in particular, Fulton Jr. Phenomenal performance. We had Teofimo beating Josh Taylor as the underdog. Phenomenal performance. We had Devin Haney. Phenomenal performance against Regis Prograis. Phenomenal stuff. Another great performances. We had several, more than a handful, phenomenal, perfect performances from fighters that put them on pound for pound list. Bam Rodriguez against Sonny Edwards, another one, just recently. We've had several of them put younger fighters on pound for pound lists. Just great performances. But Bud stands out amongst the rest. Why? It was such a big fight, and it's the top two welterweights, and it's a fight that they were pushing off for years, that we were waiting for. And to Team Batman Boxing's point earlier on, he's of the opinion, I'm just not going to give much credit for that fight due to them pushing it off for so long. I understand how it's going to rub people the wrong way. I'm with you. I don't like marination. But at the same time, what Bud did, he did a great service to boxing fans, I believe. Because I'm going to talk about the story of the year in a minute. And the story of the year really is the PBC and Showtime going away and what happens with PBC going forward and how a lot of their fighters stepped off that PBC island that it still took a long time to get those fighters off that island this year. You could talk about how the PBC had to do these fights. I think they went kicking and screaming to these fights still. Look at how long it took to make Tank versus Ryan. Look at how long it took to make Bud versus Errol. I'm of the opinion that they still didn't want to make that fight. They're fighting hard to keep their contract with Showtime going and Paramount Plus, but it's still, man, they still had to be dragged to make that fight. And the same thing with Fulton Jr. Fulton Jr. had to say they were trying to make Fulton Jr. versus Figueroa again in Minnesota. They were. They can lie about it, but they were. And Fulton Jr. came out and made a video and said, don't worry about what they're talking about. We ain't doing that. And Fulton Jr. went out to Japan. And we've talked about how PBC fighters don't know what it's like to travel to a fight, look down, and see ocean. And we've seen what happens to those fighters when they have to do that. Fulton Jr. gets destroyed by Inoue. And I remember the American boxing public telling me that Inoue is about to be exposed. He's about to be exposed. He's about to be destroyed. He's never fought a slick fighter like this before. And not only is he slick, he's a better boxer and he's bigger. Inoue is about to be exposed. And it was the opposite. Deontay Wilder goes over to Saudi to get the Saudi oil bag. And guess what happens? He goes on his Eurobum tour to fight Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua. And now he's likely not even going to get to Anthony Joshua because he couldn't even get through Joseph Parker. He lands 19 punches in 12 rounds, fellas. 19 in 12 rounds. When we take those fights off of paper and put them into reality, stuff happens. And a lot of these guys have been getting exposed this year in 2023. We're seeing how delicate that roster was the whole time. We're seeing it. And that's the story of the year. And we'll talk more about that in a minute because there were a lot of meltdowns after the Errol Spence fight. But Bud Crawford goes into that fight. And I remember doing the video, I think it was the Thursday or Friday before, and I had people in the chat telling me, Calix, you have to lighten up. And I'm saying, just trust my instincts here. Just trust my instincts here. We're all friends here. Just trust my instincts. Calix, you have to lighten up because this is great for boxing. This fight's great for boxing. And you need to just talk about the fight and how great it is. And then we're all going to have a great, and we did. And I talked about how great of a fight matchup it was. But at the same time, I said, I'm not going to pretend that this is all-time great welterweight versus all-time great welterweight. I'm not going to do it. That's one thing I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't a level difference between Bud Crawford, if not two, and Errol Spence. And another thing I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight how marination has made this worse for Errol Spence than it would have been had he lost 4 or 5 years ago to Bud Crawford. Had they just done the fight then Errol Spence is younger. He's a younger big fish, right? And then he can come back from that beating that he's going to take against Bud Crawford. I'm saying this the week of the fight, before the fight. Marination is terrible for Errol Spence here. You're assuming that the fight is now bigger than it would have been 3 or 4 years ago, and that's quite the assumption. You don't know. You don't know, and I would argue it's not. But at the same time, all this does is now Errol is older. It's going to be tougher for him to recover. And the more you marinate a fight, the more high stakes you make it for the fighters. So now Bud Crawford in this high stakes fight puts on one of the greatest performances we've seen in a main event pay-per-view in modern history. And now his aura climbs. Errol Spence, much like we expected here, and we were trying to warn people about, puts up a dud and gets absolutely destroyed, worse than Arturo Gatti did against Floyd Mayweather, and his aura goes down here. At least for Arturo Gatti, in that aspect, we knew who Arturo Gatti was at that point. And Arturo Gatti was telling you, look, I know who you think I am, blood and guts warrior. I already know, future Hall of Famer, all that stuff. I can give you a show, I can entertain, but I want to face the best. And then you have more forgiveness for Arturo Gatti because of that, right? And then he goes back and he recovers from that because Arturo Gatti's out there fighting the fights and he's putting on entertaining performances. But with Errol Spence Jr., you barely get him once per year. He's getting in car crashes more than he's fighting. And you marinate the fight that everybody wants to see for 4 or 5 years. And Errol Spence is the main one partaking in this. He's not knocking down Al Heyman's door and saying, make the fight. Make the fight. He wants it. I want it too. Make the fight. He didn't do that until recently. What is Errol saying 4 or 5 years ago? He's saying, you clean up your side of the street. I'm going to clean up my side of the street and we'll see. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. So we get performance of the year from Bud Crawford. And since you make it more high stakes, it's not only worse for the fighter, it's worse for the fanboys of these fighters because We saw the most glorious, unbelievable meltdowns I've ever seen from a fan base in any sport. Any sport. Not just boxing, fellas, any sport. I have never seen meltdowns the way I saw Errol Spence fans melting down after that Bud Crawford fight. And I saw it coming in that second round. I saw the train wreck just playing out, and I start with my Twitter fingers in the second round. I said, told you so, and I'm doing it for a reason. Because I want these guys, I want them seeing this. I told you so. We told you so. Errol was never on Bud's level. We knew what the meltdown was going to be after this fight, and I'll tell you what, it was even worse than I thought. This was, I couldn't do, I still can't believe it. I cannot believe that grown men behave this way. You remember the Bronx Tale where Sonny's telling Colangelo, Mickey Mantle's what you were. Go ask Mickey Mantle how much your dad makes. He's not going to know. He doesn't care. Nobody cares. Mickey Mantle? You're worried about Mickey Mantle? Can your dad pay the bills? Can he? And you're worried about Mickey Mantle? And that's how these grown men are behaving. I want to show them that Bronx Tale clip. Dude, you're melting down over a fighter. And some of you dudes are like in your 40s, 50s. You're melting down over a dude who doesn't know you exist, and he's younger than a lot of you guys. And we tried to warn you it was coming, so you should have seen it coming to a certain degree. And these dudes are on their spaces, they're on their YouTubes, and they're just crying. Like they're just, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. It's the worst day of my life. Dudes are blaming all kind of stuff that has nothing to do with boxing. And the reason the meltdown was so bad, and I highlighted this at the time, is they had no talking points ready for a Bud Crawford destruction of Errol Spence Jr. They had no talking points ready because they just didn't see it coming. And we tried to warn them. They really thought, they believed that this was an all-time great welterweight clash between all-time great welterweights. And Roberto Diaz is on our show a couple weeks before, or a month before, whenever it was, a couple months before, I think right before the fight signed. And he's saying the only fighter of this era, one of the only fighters of this era, Bud Crawford, who, you know, generally when I'm a matchmaker and I look at fights and I watch them, and generally when people ask me about these mythical matchups, I pick the fighters from the era previously because they're just tougher fighters. They're generally better fighters, in my opinion, greater. And he said, there's one guy though, Bud Crawford. I think he fits in with all the great welterweights of all time. And we agreed, and I agreed. And I said at the time, look, Errol Spence does not fit in with that. When we talk about Errol Spence, when we view Errol Spence, we view him as a guy, like, and no disrespect to these guys, but the Paul Williamses of the world, the Antonio Margaritos, the Josh Clottys, guys from previous generations who were top 5, top 6, top 7 welterweights. And I think if you put Errol Spence and you drop him off to the welterweight division 2007, 2008, he's in good fights with guys like Carlos Quintana, Antonio Margarito, Paul Williams. I think he loses to a Miguel Cotto. But I think he's on that level. He was never on that top level of Bud Crawford, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya, Tito Trinidad. They tried to slip Errol Spence into that conversation. They sneakily tried to sneak Errol Spence into that conversation, but he was never in that conversation, truthfully. He just wasn't, and we tried to warn him. Look, man, this guy should be fighting more. You're making this more high stakes than it needs to be. You're marinating this fight for a half a decade, almost half a decade. This guy's fighting once every 15 months at this point, whatever it is. You're making this one fight more high stakes than it needs to be for him because he's going to lose this fight and it's going to be terrible for his legacy. And your meltdown after the fight is going to be awful. We tried to warn him. And they just didn't have their talking points ready for a destruction. They had their talking points ready for a close loss. They had their talking points ready. They could have said something like, oh, he was robbed. Oh, his trainer poisoned him. Stuff like that, right? Bud had something in his gloves, but the destruction was so bad and it was so one-sided that they had nothing. They had nothing. There was nothing there for them to grasp at, so they were just left there crying and melting down. Grown men, fellas, grown men crying, melting down on the internet publicly. You had dudes blaming the Jews for this. And I'm like, the Jews? Where are the Jews at? Where are the Jewish people at? What do they have to do with this? Did they sneak in the ring and beat Errol down too? What do they have to do with this? Dudes just melting down. It was the most glorious meltdown I've ever seen in my life, and they deserved it. They deserved it, and that's why I said Bud did boxing fans such a service there, because all of the worst people involved with boxing and boxing content creation were humbled this year. And look, don't get me wrong, some of them have disappeared. Some of them have lost all credibility after those meltdowns, but 90% of them are still around. And 90% of them are still going to go on with their foolishness and their nonsense. You're not going to shut them up. If that's what you expected, that's why I need to warn you about this. It'd be nice to just make fun of these guys, but they're going to come back. They're already back. And they're going to continue on with their foolishness, their nonsense. They're just going to pick up another fighter. Likely be a Boots Ennis or somebody like that, right? Somebody that they see that they're just going to move on to the next guy. We've seen the same thing with the Canelo detractors, right? As you think they're done. No, he fought Golovkin. You said he wasn't going to fight Golovkin. Now he fought him 3 times and he wins the trilogy, but then they just pick up the next guy. Now it's Benavidez. And now they'll pick up Bud and Benavidez. That way, if Canelo fights Benavidez, then he's ducking Bud. If Canelo fights Bud, he's ducking Benavidez. It's just constant, right? It's constant. These guys don't go away. You're always going to have to deal with them. But it was fun this year seeing them get humbled. It was. That was the story of the year to me, is the PBC as a whole being humbled. And you warned them about this at the time too, is they're bragging about the amount of fights on Showtime, PBC, and then you try to put it in proper perspective, right? Is, look, we're paying a ton of money for these fights. Pay-per-view, 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 pay-per-view. And then dudes will try to spread their false talking points once again that Showtime this year put on closer fights overall as far as betting odds, and we've already debunked that one too, right? Because Matchroom on DAZN put on 33 fights this year. It was roughly 8.5 to 1 betting odds on average. Same thing with Showtime. Showtime, I think, on PBC put on somewhere around 18 fights if you're counting them all as PBC events. So about half the amount of fights and same betting odds, about 8.5 to 1 closing betting odds. And then on top of that, look, they put on great events this year. They did. But we knew why that was. They're trying to save that Showtime relationship and keep Showtime going. Trying to make that one last push. And then they don't get it. And all of these people who have been saying for years that if you're not fighting on Showtime, you're not doing anything. You're over there fighting on an app. You're fighting on an app. You're not fighting on Showtime. You're not doing it. And Showtime goes away. And Deontay Wilder fights last week on DAZN. And he's fighting on Anthony Joshua's undercard, which is weird because I was told that he's bigger than Anthony Joshua. So Anthony Joshua, you would think, would be fighting on his undercard. And I've been told that Deontay Wilder doesn't fight on apps, especially DAZN. But it's weird because I swear I saw 6 days ago that he was fighting on DAZN. On Anthony Joshua's undercard. It's weird. So weird how that happens. Life comes at you fast. It comes at you fast. But this is where we're at. And that meltdown, it just showed, man, like the dudes who are out there beating their chest, projecting, right, that all this strength are generally the most insecure ones. And we saw it all come down that week of July 29th, ending July 29th, where Inoue, where Fulton Jr. goes over there and they start to spread these rumors, right? Some of it came from Fight Hype. We call it Floyd Hype. That Inoue raps. He doesn't wrap his hands right, stuff like this. And that, Vada, it's really weird. It's super, super duper weird. It's super weird. It's super weird. Super weird with the Vada testing and the Vada testing. And then Fulton Jr. goes over there and Inoue destroys him. After months of us hearing that Inoue is about to get exposed, Inoue doesn't leave Japan. Inoue doesn't fight anybody, which is weird. He's been in so many title fights, right? He doesn't fight anybody. And now he still doesn't fight anybody, even after beating Fulton Jr. It's weird. It's weird how this works. And then Errol Spence Jr. gets, to cap off the week, gets the worst pay-per-view main event beatdown I've seen in almost 2 decades. And it was actually worse than Arturo Gatti getting beat down by Floyd Mayweather, because of what they tried to make this fight out to be, a 50-50 betting odds fight between 2 all-time great welterweights. And what it came down to was we had an all-time great welterweight fighting a really good welterweight. That's what we had. That's what we had, fellas. And it showed in the ring. And Bud Crawford just absolutely beats him from pillar to post, absolutely destroys him. And we get the most glorious meltdowns I've ever seen in my life. All of the worst people in the world were just crying. Just crying. Delivered on their doorstep that week. And then a couple months later, their hero, their false god, false idol, Al Heyman, loses his network in Showtime. Just a rough year. But they had that weird, and we tried to warn them when they're celebrating these fights being made. It's like, yes, this is good. This is good. It's not good that we have to pay so much money for them. So let's put it in perspective, but it's good. But this is about to go very bad for you. It's about to go very bad for you. Oh, yeah, it's about to go bad for you. Look at how much money I put on Spence. Look at how much money I put on Fulton Jr. They're about to run through these guys and destroy them. Deontay Wilder's about to go on a Eurobum tour out in Saudi. And the PBC fighters just get destroyed, because when you drop these guys, when you take them off a PBC island and drop them off somewhere else, they don't look the same. It's weird. Remember in Pinocchio where you drop these kids off and you put them on this island, all of a sudden they start looking completely different, right? And it's the same thing with these PBC fighters. You take them off a PBC island, you put them here. Who is that guy? That's not Errol Spence. That guy, he didn't look like that over here. Who is this guy fighting Bud Crawford? That's the guy we told you about. We told you. Mikey Garcia, like you thought that was a great win? We told you. We warned you. We warned you this was going to happen. Who is this guy fighting Inoue? That's not Fulton Jr. It is Fulton Jr. That is him. He's not fighting Figueroa. He's fighting a different guy. That's not Deontay Wilder. That's not my king. That's not the king. That's not him. It's the same guy. Lost to Tyson Fury 3 times. It's weird. Like when he doesn't fight PBC fighters, he looks completely different, right? It's like we tried to warn you. We tried to warn you. And that's where we are. KO of the year was Junto Nakatani. One of the stories of the year, like Junto Nakatani, look, when he's fighting Andrew Maloney, I'm yelling at the TV between the 11th and 12th round at his corner, literally, stop the fight. Stop the fight. I see Junto Nakatani loading up on his left hand, loading up on the left hand, stop the fight. Then Junto Nakatani absolutely sends him to hell in the 12th round with the left hand. So that's KO of the year. Activity once again. And we talk about activity. I'm about to get the comments in a minute. Look, fellas, activity. We're still at 1.2 fights per average if you take the top 100 ESPN pound for pound. So I want to give a special shout out to Tim Tszyu, fought 3 times. Robeisy Ramirez fought 3 times. Lee Wood fought 3 times. Navarrete fought 3 times. And by the way, Joseph Parker, who just beat Deontay Wilder, fought 4 times. And that's another specific example, is the fighters who were not active this year did not do well, with certain exceptions. And look, we can talk about Bud Crawford fighting once this year, but he actually fought in December. So he was only on a 7-month layoff, which is short for Bud, and which is the norm for now, right? But the fighters who were not active did not do well in big fights. They just didn't. Errol, 15-month layoff, I believe. Fulton Jr. was around 15, 17-month layoff. And Mel Charlo was like a 17-month layoff. And all those guys did awful. Lost big time to fighters who were simply more active. And PBC, that's another mark on their history, is they send their fighters into big fights. They have a track record of this, inactive. They send their fighters limping into big fights. They marinate these fights too long, right? And then it's not the best time for their fighters to be fighting at that point. Their fighters are now damaged. Look at Errol Spence. And then they send them in with a big layoff. And I showed again this year. It was another story of this year, is the fighters at the top, and it trickles all the way down to the top 100, top 150, top 200, however long you want to take it, 1.2 per year. And that's not good. You have prospects of the year candidates now fighting 3-4 times per year. You can't have that. You can't have it. It's trickled all the way down to prospects, fellas. All the way down. And it's another story going under the radar, but to me, it's one of the stories of the year, is activity. It's not good. It's not good. And it all ties in. It all ties in because the PBC needs to start learning from their mistakes if they want to do better going in the future. And we can't expect them to do anything different than what they've been doing. They're just not gonna. But if they want to, they need to start doing some things different. Let me get to some of these. Shout out Iceman. Bud and Inoue fights were on my birthday week, and they gave me great birthday gifts. Shout out my guy, Unbiased Brim Reaper. Appreciate you, and enjoy chatting with you on Twitter or X as well. Appreciate you coming through. Inoue announced he was going to try and get 6 fights over the next 2 years, so there's that. Yeah, 3 fights. 3 fights in 2024 is what he wants. So we'll see. If Mel tried to win versus Canelo, he gets KO, but wins more respect. Yeah, I agree. Calix, my lesson learned for 2023 is 154 division. Top contenders fight to put pressure on the belt holder until it forces decisions by sanctioning bodies. No marination, just fight. Yes. Shakur did that at 135 as well. Put pressure on the sanctioning bodies to make the right decision, and put pressure on these fighters that aren't fighting their mandatory. And you see Benavidez trying to do that now finally with Canelo as well. And they don't need to do that because I think the Canelo fight happens in September, but we'll see. But yeah, Tim Tszyu's putting pressure on fighters at 154 on sanctioning bodies. Look, the guy's not going to fight at 154. Give me the belt. And the same thing needs to happen at 160 with Mal Charlo, for the love of God. Loma over Haney. I had Loma beating Haney too. I did, but it is what it is with that. It's all on Bud that he didn't get the Spence fight sooner. No, it's not, but you can reward Inoue for being more active. It's fair for pound. Yeah, and that's where I'm at with it too. I understand stuff happens. It's the same thing with Ukraine, right? Is it's obvious Lomachenko, when Lomachenko's a 2-fight-per-year fighter his whole career, and all of a sudden he's a 1-fight-per-year fighter, there's stuff going on in Ukraine. And the same thing with Usyk and fight negotiations with Tyson Fury and what's going on with Ukraine. Delakian down there at 112. They're simply not able to be as active as they want to be. So you take that stuff into consideration. But when we're talking about a pound-for-pound list, I mean, I got to do what I have on paper. That's the best way I can explain it. And while we're on the Lomachenko conversation, let me say this. The robbery of the year to me was Kambosos getting a gift decision against Maxie Hughes in the great state of Oklahoma. That was egregious. That was one of those to where you say, there's no way. There's just no way. Like there was at least some murkiness with the Haney decision over Loma, right? And the Maxie Hughes Kambosos thing, I'm watching this, and Maxie Hughes is just, he's beating him easy. And I'm saying they're going to give Kambosos the decision. Watch, I saw it coming. And they do it. And it pissed me off because, dude, I think I even bet Kambosos, so I was happy with the money, but it pissed me off because Maxie Hughes won the fight, clearly won the fight. And it's one of those where you say, there's no way. There's no way that a judge can be that incompetent, and to have 2 or 3 of them be that incompetent, there's just no way. There is just no way. So I'm sorry for the Kambosos fans, but he lost that fight. And Maxie Hughes should be getting this shot at Lomachenko in April. And to be honest, I would like for Lomachenko to say, look, man, look, I understand the belt thing. It's an easy belt to pick off against Kambosos in Australia, make some money as well, but I'm going to go over there and fight Shakur. Let's me and Shakur just fight for this belt, and then we can circle back to that another time. Let Kambosos fight the other guy in the rankings, and then we'll circle back to this. Lomachenko at this point should be a guy that's above the belts, or he should feel like he's above the belts at 135, been there, done that. Was never able to get undisputed, had 2 shots of getting it. So tough break on the second one. And I give him credit for fighting the first one in an empty ballroom when it could have been easy for him to say, no, I'm going to just lay up like everybody else at this point. So I'll give him credit. But at the same time, what do I say about Canelo all the time is Canelo is going to not be the face of boxing in the future when he stops behaving like Canelo. Canelo has went out and got these fans. The media didn't create Canelo, so they can't separate Canelo from his base as hard as they try. As difficult as they try, they can't separate him from his base because Canelo went out and got his base organically. Only Canelo can separate himself from his base, and the only way he can do that is not by losing fights, because he's lost fights. He lost to Mayweather, he lost to Bivol, and we're still here. It's if Canelo stops behaving like Canelo. If Canelo in 2024 doesn't fight Benavidez, doesn't fight this weird fight they want him to fight against Bud Crawford, then you start to say, all right, man, like it's done here. But he's not going to do that because he has a track record, right? But Lomachenko is starting to show some signs of doing stuff like that. And I understand some of this stuff is beyond him, the stuff going on in Ukraine, fighting once per year. I get that. But if you're going to fight once per year, you have to make it count. And Kambosos for a belt, it just doesn't do it, to be honest. Just doesn't do it. Kambosos at this point is not the Kambosos that we thought was the Kambosos after he beat Teofimo Lopez. And it's a great win. Teofimo wasn't Teofimo that night, but guess what? He has himself to blame for that. Kambosos went out and won. And he leveraged that into 2 big paydays against Devin Haney. He leveraged that into being the A side against Maxie Hughes and getting a gift decision in Oklahoma because they want to keep him around to feed him to guys like Lomachenko. And that's great, right? That's great for him. But at the same time, I don't need to see Lomachenko fight Kambosos. I don't. We should be past that. I don't need to see Lomachenko scoop up another belt. We should be past that. If we get next year Lomachenko versus Kambosos in April and then Lomachenko versus Shakur later on in the year, then fine. That's a good year at that point. But at this point in time, with what's going on in Ukraine, we have a once per year fighter. And if the one fight next year is Kambosos, that's unacceptable for me. And that's when Lomachenko starts to separate himself from that base. It's like, that's not why I came here. I didn't come here to see him win a belt against Kambosos. That's not why I came here. That's not why I'm here. So peace. I'm out. So we'll have to see how 2024 plays out for our friend Lomachenko. Friend of the channel, LRB, always watches. Yeah, he does. I know a few. There's a few that I've been told watch, and he's one of them. He's one of them. Let's see. Spence is retired. He just don't know it. PBC can't pay his guarantees without pay-per-view, and he's not selling right now. Yeah, this is another thing. This is another thing. We have to see how much is in that budget. If there's nothing in that budget, we have to see how PBC navigates the Amazon Prime thing. And I'll tell you this, if this is what I think it is, then you're going to see almost every fight, almost every card on Amazon Prime is a pay-per-view. I think that's what you're going to get. I think you're going to see them try to model themselves after the UFC on Amazon Prime and put pay-per-view, 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 pay-per-view. And that's why I tell you, enjoy the inactivity and enjoy the price of the brick going up, because you're going to get more of it in 2024, particularly when it comes to the PBC. That great reset is not here yet. If it is coming, it's not here. I don't know what to make of the Top Rank rumors selling to Dana White and his crew. I don't know what to make of that, so I'll hold off on my opinions of that. But that's just some stuff I had to say today. And this will likely be my last show of the year. So I want to say this while I still have y'all. I appreciate all y'all coming through this year. I appreciate y'all driving the numbers up. We don't want clicks here. D-Style and I at the ACP network, we don't want clicks. We don't want to just title certain things in order to just get people to come through, because then it's not organic. We want to have people come through that we can talk boxing to intelligently. And when you see a retention rate grow, you're dealing with, at this point, that's the people that we've decided a year ago to go after, is the people who are not just going to click on a video for 5 minutes and then leave, the people who are going to stay. And we just have intelligent boxing conversations, because the people who are staying for longer, they have the longer attention span, and they'll want to stick around and talk boxing and have intelligent conversations. And that's generally how you get a more intelligent chat. And we feel like we've grown significantly with that this year. When I look at the channel numbers, I see people sticking around for 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 70 minutes. And you see that retention rate climb as the clicks gradually go up as well. And that's a good sign of growth. So I want to say that I appreciate y'all. And I also want to say that I think what has turned me off from a lot of content creators the past few years is I think a lot of them, some of them know what they're talking about, but even those guys, I think, come off as a bit smug, to be honest. I think there's a gap out there, a vacuum for, look, I think you have a lot of publications and writers, and I think they're snarky, and they're very snarky to anybody who comes at them any kind of way, whether they're just challenging their beliefs. They feel like they're in their ivory tower with their pinky up, and they're too good to converse with just normal boxing fans. So you have that. And then you have the low intelligent crowd who they're getting a lot of clicks, but they just can't have intelligent boxing conversations. So you have those two, but you don't have too many people who can have intelligent conversations with these people up here, but then somehow relate to these people down here, because the people who are intelligent, I find, are just too nerdy. They're too nerdy. Like they don't, to use the terminology for the kids, maybe they're still using this word swag or riz. They don't have enough riz. They don't have enough swag. These writers up here, these smart, intelligent boxing content creators up here they're just kind of nerdy. Let's be honest. And then these guys down here are feeding anybody any kind of clickbait garbage. So you don't have anybody in the middle with riz who can still have intelligent conversations. And that's where we try to fit in a little bit. I'd like to think that I have a little bit of riz, a little bit of swag. So we'll try. But I just say all this to say, I would never, like, if I ever come off as too arrogant or conceited or the guy drinking wine in his ivory tower, the first people who are going to text me and come after me are the people in the chat that have been here from day one. Nando, Chauncey, guys like that are going to be like, what was that? That was out of character. What was that? Right? And it's because we're all on the same level here. This isn't a dude talking down to people in the chat and saying, hit me up with super chats, hit me up with super chats, hit me up with super chats. The main thing I ask for here is just hit the like button. Just hit the like button. Let's try to get to 100 likes per episode. That's it. That's it. And then we'll get here and we'll talk boxing, and that's it. That's all it is. So I appreciate y'all driving those numbers up, hitting that like button this year, and setting records for this channel. And we hope for more growth in 2024. And I want to say, man, I wish the best for each and every one of you. God bless you and your families. I hope you have a safe and happy new year. And I hope you have the best year possible in 2024, all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Peace. God bless.